So in our breakout groups, we had a really good conversation about some of the work that has been done to pass statewide domestic worker bill of rights, and our friends from AFIRE talking about the fight to win the Illinois Bill of Rights. And one of the things that a comrade said was um, that, you know, in the beginning, folks weren't exactly sure of what the fight would look like, or even how to go about it, and that there was a lot of things that they learned along the way and a lot of challenges that they were able to address along the way, but that in the beginning, it was really a big question mark of how do we do this? And so it's really great that we're here today to talk about what the content of the bill is. As we've been talking a lot about this Bill of Rights, we've had a lot of excitement about it, a lot of mobilization around it, a lot of media about it. But really for us, it's important for us to know what we're talking about when we talk about this Bill of Rights, what exactly the provisions are, and what we're asking for. And so we're going to really dig into that. And as I said earlier, this Bill of Rights, this National Bill of Rights is really important because we've been able to pass it in several states, but we also know that we have a lot more to go. 9 states is a far cry from 50. And a lot of the provisions that are in those Bill of Rights have been to provide domestic workers with basic protections, but we also know that we have to go beyond basic. We want to be able to create the best conditions that we can for folks in these fields, and this is a way that we're doing it. This process for drafting the Bill of Rights was really member-led. We had worker councils who had been working on a meeting together, really drafting out what their standards should be across the industries that they're in, making recommendations as to what ideal conditions would be, and putting that all in the bill. And so from the beginning, we're stating these are the provisions, the rights, and additional achievements that we want for the field to be able to say that these are good jobs and that the issues that we have faced historically are addressed, and that these become jobs where folks feel held, valued, and respected. And so from the beginning, we're not undercutting ourselves, we're not compromising. Instead, we've put it all in one bill. And I think that's something that we need to emphasize, because there is a strategy to be able to, kind of put those all in individual bills and, and think about what is politically viable. And instead, we're saying these are actually our dreams and our hopes, and we're putting it all in the bill and we're standing by it. And so we'll talk about what exactly those are. So as you see from your slide, our Bill of Rights is actually organized into 3 main goals. The first, to include domestic workers in common workplace rights and protections, as we talked about, the very basic rights that domestic workers have so long been excluded from. We want to be able to instead of having that subfloor, to bring them up to the floor where most workers are today. The second is to create new workplace rights and protections and address the unique challenges of domestic work. And so in addition to those very basic ones, we want to go above and beyond and address the ways that domestic work is uniquely positioned as work that's done inside the household, that work that is not done as a traditional workforce would be, and to provide solutions to those challenges. Lastly, we want to ensure, I think this is, our group said, rights on paper, rights in person. So we have to make sure that those rights are enforced. It doesn't do us any good if we're only able to see legislation that dictates that these rights exist, but that in reality, workers are feeling that and workers are able to act on it. And so those are the ways that we see our Domestic Worker Bill of Rights, and we're going to go into it. So what is actually in the provisions of the bill? So we have strengthened civil rights protections, as we talked before. Domestic workers are not protected against harassment and discrimination. Some of the civil rights legislation that has impacted other workers has not been extended to domestic workers. And so we want to address that. Overtime for live-in workers. Live-in workers are still carved out, and it's important for us to bring the conversation back to live-in workers and make sure that the work and the time that they do is valued and compensated for fairly. Having health and safety protections. And so some of the provisions within the Domestic Worker Bill of Rights talks about creating grants for health and safety education for workers, as well as providing transparency about the health risk of certain supplies that folks use within the everyday duties of their jobs. Earned sick days and paid sick days. We know that a lot of members who are doing this organizing work, who are part of this movement, understand how important it is to have paid time off and paid sick days to care for themselves, care for their families. And right now, that is just a reality that is not widespread amongst the folks in the workplace. So we want to ensure that the work that folks are putting in, they're able to also have time accrued to be able to take off for, you know, the things that are important to them and to care for themselves and their loved ones. Meals and rest breaks, as we said earlier, you know, a lot of places, this is just not even a standard for even workers outside of domestic work. You're not guaranteed to have a break throughout the day. You're not guaranteed to have time to eat and sustain yourself. And in order for us to be able to show up and show out for the folks that we care for, we have to be able to take care of ourselves. And so that includes meal and rest breaks. Lastly, privacy and access to communications and support in case of emergencies. So particularly within the household, workers are subjected to, you know, scrutiny and supervision in ways that oftentimes violates workers' privacies. And so we want to make sure that workers have a right to their own privacy, right to know when they're being watched or recorded, and that in case of emergencies, they have access to communications and are not barred from it. And so before we actually get into the additional rights and benefits that we are offering up in this Bill of Rights, we want to talk about these very basic commonplace workplace rights and protections. If we were able to get these things outlined in Domestic Worker Bill of Rights, how would it impact you in your work life? How would having protection from harassment, overtime, health and safety protections, earned sick time, meal and rest breaks, privacy, how would that impact you? And folks can say it on the phone, they can drop it in the chat as we've been doing.
It would save for a lot of awkward conversations. Mostly because one thing I had to learn in my job is to be assertive about those things, because it's almost like unofficial. Like I have to say, like, you have to be home by this amount of time because I will not work an extended day. I already worked 12 hours. I'm entitled to a lunch break. This is what I will do and won't do. And like when I initially started 5 years ago working as a nanny, like I didn't know about all that. Mm-hmm. And people take advantage of what you don't know. Mm-hmm. So having this on paper and in person, I think would also help out not just me, but like everyone else who works in the same position. I know a lot of other nannies who are also working off the books or undocumented, and like they're not assertive about these things either because they're afraid of the repercussions, and they get constantly taken advantage of.
Right. Yeah, that's a perfect example. I think that you know, it shouldn't always be up to workers to go above and beyond their comfort levels to ensure their basic rights, but that coming to a job, we should know what to expect, and that employers should know that things like meal and rest breaks is something that is required in order for folks to do the job. And so, as you said, yes, it takes away this awkward conversation and just makes it a normal thing that happens between employer and employee, and instead of something that you have to be brave and have to kind of go on. What other ways does this impact you?
Hi, Cici. Yeah, this also impacted me when I was working with the diplomats. I didn't get this all that we are proposing as included to our Bill of Rights. There are my previous employer violated all these rights for me. So this is powerful. So I am willing to join this fight because, you know, it has impacted a lot to all the domestic workers that has no right in their workplaces. Yeah, I experienced this, and it caused me my physical body getting deteriorated. Until now, I felt that impact to my physical body of what I had it before.
Thank you so much for sharing. I think that testimony is really, really powerful. And we know that it goes above just having these, the protections in place, but that it has an impact on our physical state, our mental state, and that a running list of the things that we've been excluded from compounded together, I imagine, makes it very hard to do the work that you were called to do. And that's something that employers should deeply, deeply contend with, because if they're expecting folks to come and provide, quality care and this quality service, meanwhile they're not providing for any of these things, and you're having a person who is, their body is rapidly deteriorating, their emotional being is not taken care of, then they're just not able to do what you called them to do. And so we really, really appreciate you sharing that. And want to work towards a future where these things are just standard. So thank you.
Exactly. Thank you.
I think we had one more.
Oh yeah, thank you. I was gonna say, right, though I am a person before not knowing all this kind of law yet, but I knew within that we have this protection and we have the right. But after I joined the organization and knowing all this right with Filipino Workers Senate and of course National Domestic Workers Alliance, now we have the power. We have the fear not. You don't have to afraid and tell to your employer now, if I may sit down, if I may go like, in that corner or in the kitchen, I want to have my lunch. I want to have my privacy. I will sit down as a person that I can go eat in a proper way. Not before like you are chewing, you have cracker in your pocket and you're shaking and you're still doing all this kind of stuff. Now we have to sit down and nourish our body. As we nourish our spirit, we're not just like a server, like doing all this stuff and not eating, not taking a break. So now we could say like, if I may sit down and I want to have my lunch, peace and quiet, and I want to have my privacy. And you stay here and I will get back to you as soon as I finish my lunch or my break time. So now we don't have to afraid to say all of these things, that we are a person, that we need all of this. Not just them, like we talk about with Aisha, when we had a breakout, that we need all of this. We can say, we can lay down our cards that, hey, you're the wealthy people or you're in the higher class, you're in the first class society, but we are here, but we deserve this. We are also people that we need a sick day. We need a vacation. So now we have all this urge to tell them, right? We have all this protection now. So if you will listen, I might, line up all of these things that we need. We have to be recognized now. Like I said, we all need to shine. It's about time for us to shine. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you. It is about time, and we should all be free from fear when we go to work and have these things laid out for us. So thank you for that. Let's go to the next slide. Great. So the new workplace rights and benefits that address the challenges of domestic work. So the first thing is, as we said, written agreements. Written agreements, you always write it down, have it in a contract, have this formal agreement between employer and employee to stipulate what the conditions are, what the duties you're expected to do, and what the rights are. Oftentimes for employers, what they'll say is that they didn't know that workers were entitled to these rights, and in this way, it makes it very plain, and it makes a standard case for all folks who enter into these types of agreements with domestic workers, that these things are to be expected, and you have it in writing for the protection of the worker. Fair scheduling. So oftentimes workers have to contend with last minute cancellations, last minute scheduling changes, and does not give any grace to domestic workers or workers for the emergencies that come up in life. And so there are provisions specifically dedicated to making sure that whatever schedule is established, that it is established in a time that gives domestic workers adequate preparation for their duties. And that if any last minute cancellations or changes happen, that domestic workers are fairly compensated for it. A wage and standards board. This is something that was established in Seattle as part of the Municipal Bill of Rights, but also something that is able to contend with the challenges as they arise. You know, these are not just standards that are created once and, you know, they just kind of get concretized and never evolve, but that standards boards are able to investigate what standards should be in the field and set recommendations on things like wages, health and safety, as well as what promotes the well-being of workers. We have protections against wage deductions, unfair wage deductions, so workers having to come out of pocket for things that they have to do their job. I hear about home care workers having to buy their own supplies, gloves, et cetera, the scrubs, and having those deductions taken from their paychecks. And we want to make sure that the wage deductions are fair and not causing an undue burden onto workers. Workforce training grants. So we have grants for industry-wide training programs, and also studies on how to ensure that skills trainings are actually leading to improved wages and career opportunities. So like, it's one thing to get skilled up, it's another thing for those skills to actually translate into improved conditions and more opportunities for domestic workers. And lastly, a study about benefits, how domestic workers are able to access the existing programs that are out there, and creating other options that are affordable and easy for workers to access in a way that they haven't been able to before. Next slide. So rights on paper, rights in person. I'm gonna always use that, so thank you all for giving me that. We have grants to worker organizations who are doing outreach and enforcement. So these are, you know, being able to provide the proper resources for community groups who are doing that work of doing Know Your Rights and having outreach to workers so that this is just widespread knowledge that we all have in the field. Creating an interagency task force, so actually having administrative groups and federal groups to talk to one another, that there's not all of these different agencies that we go to for different issues, but they're actually working together to support the enforcement work and making sure that the rights that were established are actually happening, and if not, finding ways to address them. So that's the Department of Labor, Health and Human Services, and also the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. I think strengthening protections against retaliations is pretty explanatory. Making sure that when workers voice their rights, or they voice, you know, they give voice to when their rights are violated, that they're not retaliated against, and that there are strong protections for employers not to do that. Lastly, ensuring that care is affordable for consumers. And so we like to work a lot with, you know, disability rights groups, groups that represent seniors or children, and making sure whatever care is out there, that it's also affordable to people who need it. And so providing funding provisions to make sure that folks who are on Medicaid consumers are able to, you know, still afford the services of workers as workers are getting increased wages and access to benefits. It's not shutting anyone out. And so just as we talked about the basic rights that we're trying to get domestic workers up to, how would these additional provisions impact your work? And so we're talking about, you know, really going to our ideal vision of what the field could look like. How would this impact you? And I'm interested in, some of these innovative ways that, our worker councils have really grappled with and offered up, solutions like standards boards and grants for outreach and creating task force and having written agreements. How do those additional provisions, how will that change your everyday life?
Well, if a domestic worker or a caregiver, this new bill to protect us is really helping, and the problem is how do you assert that in front of a greedy employer who outrightly violates your rights. Like, for example, meal breaks, they don't allow you to go out and have your 30-minute break all on your own, which the law provides, right? Because you can't do that because you can't leave the client. So what happens is, because this has been going on for 3 years, I'm talking about the experience of a caregiver who cannot get out and have her own time, So as years went on, when she found out that this is, that this is a violation of her right to a meal break or rest break, I'm talking about a California setting because this is already approved. This is already the law. So she went to the labor department to sue her employer for that, other than the non-payment of overtime pay. I mean, over the time that she worked overtime is not being paid. She's paid straight $100, $120 a day. So yeah, these laws that are approved are helping us, the domestic workers and caregivers. But the enforcement or the standing up to your rights, how are you going to do this without losing your job? And as you mentioned earlier, someone mentioned about the enforcement bill that has been approved. We need to strategize our as organizers, our move in order to educate everyone, not just the caregivers, but the employers and the general public, that these are now the rights afforded to the domestic workers and caregivers, and it's the law of the land. So it's a long shot. It's a big victory that we have these laws, and it's very good that because of our effort, the organization, the alliance, so because we are united, so we're able to, to have the governor sign the bill, pass into law. Now the enforcement is something we should work on, and the enforcement includes educating the caregivers, and really, I'm not trying to be negative here, but I'm just trying to say that there's a big challenge ahead. The law is making us more encouraged to fight for our rights, to really stand up for it, but the enforcement is the challenging part.
Yeah, that's so true. I think with any statewide Bill of Rights that we've had, we've recognized that the next step is always enforcement. And learning from those lessons in the past, we intentionally put that as part of the bill in order to contend with that, and also to plan for it, because we know that it takes a lot to train folks up to have knowledge of what their rights are. Domestic workers are part of an organization and you had to go through them. This is something that we're doing right now. So imagine what would happen if we were able to have widespread enforcement, widespread educational programs in order to train workers up on to what the rights are, as well as employers as to what the new rights are for workers. And so it just has to be a thing where we are really saturating the workforce and the landscape, and that folks are aware of the things that are happening, and that we have the mechanisms in place to be able to ensure that folks are not able to roll back those rights that have been achieved. So that is definitely something that we have to look forward to, and that we have to build from the beginning. So thank you for that. And so with that, I think you had a really great point about, this being some long, grueling work, and the road ahead of us is it's tough and it's also long, but we know that we can get there. And we have to talk about how we are going to win this Domestic World Bill of Rights. And so I want to turn it over to MA, who's going to talk about all that it takes to get there, and what we'll be doing to see this Bill of Rights to the end.